Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Mission Matters. My name is Adam Torres, and if you'd like to apply to be a guest on the show, just head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, so today my guest is Tanya Acker, and she's host of the Tanya Acker Show, which is a podcast, and this interview is part of our Milken Global Conference series where we highlight and bring on guests who are either participants and or attendees to feature them and their experience over at the Milken Global Conference in Beverly Hills, California. And Tanya, first off, welcome to the show.
Hi, Adam. I'm so happy to be here. Really excited about the conversation.
Love to have fellow podcasters on here and love to promote and talk about their shows as well. So I'm glad to have you on. And first thing, though, I do want to talk a little bit about the Milken Conference. So you did attend this year. Is this your first time? Have you been in the past? Tell us about your experience.
My goodness. It was my first time. I was
Congrats.
Really happy to be
That's amazing.
Yes. Oh, it was so amazing. And I have to give a special thanks to my friends Barbara Johnson and Anthony Rosselli, who arranged my invitation. It was the best way I can describe it is that it's sort of like fun civics. It was sort of like a Disneyland of big ideas and engaging with people.
Did you just now say Disneyland of big ideas? Mic drop. I've been saying the Super Bowl of conferences. My girlfriend's here while I'm recording, and she's in the background. She just looked up when I repeated that, and she's a podcast host too. Of course, her show is It Starts With You, and she looked up like, what? Finally, and she don't listen to my content. She thinks it's not her thing, let's just say. She's tired of my voice. But she's like the Disneyland of...
But that's really what it feels like. It's just, this place where all of these big thinkers and people who are really engaging in issues, important things that impact everybody, that interest everybody, are kind of collaborating and sharing their minds. I had such a phenomenal time. And I think that one of the things that really struck me is that it sort of aligns, and a lot of the things that the different speakers were talking about really align with what we're talking about, right? Like there's so much conflict. There is so much disengagement from folks, often because we don't share ideas with one another. We've lost the art, not entirely, but we've lost the art of being able to communicate with one another. And Milken was just, it was so refreshing. It was a joy. The day was a joy.
Why is everyone so angry? When you talk about conflict, when you talk about all these things, what are you seeing?
Well, it's interesting. I think, Adam, that when you talk about big picture issues, we've sort of lost the plot. I think that when it's easier to focus on the things that are making you angry or annoyed about an opponent, it's easier and almost reflexive to kind of lean into that as opposed to leaning into what you do next. For instance, when you are fighting in court, and I talk about this a lot in my book, if you lean into the anger, you're going to lose a lot of money. Even if you win, you are going to raise cortisol to levels that will be super unhealthy for you. And I'm not saying it's not natural. There's a lot to make. I don't care who you're voting for. There's a lot that happens in the world that is enough to really provoke people. But I think when it really comes down to it, it's because people aren't making more focused decisions about what they want for themselves. And when you're fighting in court, it's easy to do that, right? You have to. You have to have an objective. If you are thinking about sort of a larger way that you process your life and the world and things that you engage with, sometimes making the decision about what you want to have happen next isn't as easy. On my podcast, the Tanya Acker Show, I really like to talk about why people make the decisions they do and, all sorts of decisions. If you think about how people make decisions in their lives for anything else, and I'm putting politics aside, but anything else, there's an objective. They, whether or not it's how they engage with a really painful situation. I interviewed a bit ago Brandon Guffey. He's a GOP Republican state senator who lost his son to suicide. after an online blackmailing scam. And, these horrible things are happening to kids. And he sort of made certain decisions about how he was moving forward. I talked to authors and writers and artists about how they decide to tell the stories that they want to tell. I had Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna on to talk about sort of what the decision-making process is. And I think that we don't often focus on the how and the why of why we're engaging. And, we don't always really grapple with the how and the why of why we're moving forward on certain things. We may know it, but I don't know. I think it's easier to sort of kind of fast forward to the end game, which a lot of people do, which is you are creating pain. You are doing a bad thing. You voted for somebody I don't like. And then we sort of make a lot of assumptions from there. And part of the reason we make those assumptions is that we don't often take the time, and there aren't a whole lot of platforms where people can really engage in the why. Everything becomes a shouting match, and one shouting match is just going to breed another. If you're only showing up for the mic drop moment and not to really understand anything, then you are creating a stage for perpetual anger. And I'm not saying that in some holier than thou way. Like, we all do this. I think that many, many people do it. I'll just say that. I've done it. But I do think that you really have to be mindful about why you're deciding to do whatever it is. I'm not just talking about voting for people, but if you really think about, the process of your decision-making and what you're expecting to get, like what will you get beyond the satisfaction of sticking it to somebody else?
Yeah.
And we sometimes, I think that when we're not talking about these issues that people are yelling about on television, that process becomes a lot more clear when you're talking about things that engage folks on social media and you're seeing memes and, this one says this, so you got to say that. Then I think it becomes a really different game entirely.
Yeah. So I want to talk about your book a little bit further. And I know there's only so much we can cover in, a 15-minute interview, but takeaway, if there's one thing that you hope the readers walk away with from your book, what would that be?
My book is really focused on court fights. We are an increasingly litigious society. I do not think that's a good thing. Yes, I work on a court show. I'm a TV judge on Tribunal Justice that Judge Judy created. I have represented people in conflict. I resolve conflicts. I think that when people approach a legal conflict, they have to really keep a number of things in mind. One, the law has so many rules, right? There are rules for how you must fight. And in some ways, that's a really great thing. And that's why legal fights can, not always. And by the way, I also don't mean to suggest that people always follow the rules. I also talk about that in my book. But you really should have your objective in mind. You should really assume that it's going to be very painful to get there, costly. And if not that, it takes a lot of emotional energy. I think litigation is a really draining process. And I always told clients that. I never advise anybody to go to court unless you are really, really ready for it, with all of the costs associated. So I think that people should really contemplate it very carefully. Now, I think that court and our court system, has really become an instrument of opportunity. And there are some folks for whom this advice means nothing because they like the opportunity that litigation brings. And so this is really for the folks who are not in that camp or might be forced to engage with someone in that camp. I think there are two things I say to them. One, assume that if somebody is employing court or weaponizing litigation, as some folks do, and I'm not making any broad statements about any type of litigation. I think that court is really one of the last bastions of keeping us all civilized, frankly. But if you're in a situation where you feel like litigation is being weaponized against you, think really carefully about what the options are. But you also have to think about the fact that there are mechanisms. There are mechanisms to hold people accountable for abusing and wasting your time in court, they're really costly, and it takes a lot of time to get there. And even if somebody, for instance, sues you for with no good faith basis, and you're able to get sanctions, the likelihood that you're going to get all of your time and money back is very slim. However, you should still think about doing that, because I think that when you're in an environment where things can be weaponized in that way, then you want to make sure that you're not an easy target. But the flip side of that is, you asked for one takeaway, but I'm sorry, I'm cheating.
No, you're a podcast host. It's good. This is great stuff. Go ahead.
But I think that the other side of that, and the side that frankly is far more common, I'm on the board of public counsel. We're the largest provider of free legal services in the country. It is far more common that folks have to engage with the system or are perhaps engaged with an opponent who may have more resources, who may be able to outgun them. You know, it's not just folks who are looking for opportunity who can sometimes abuse the court system. It's sometimes people who know that the person on the other side is going to have a really hard time fighting them. And so they may make a stink or not do something even when they're supposed to do it. And so I think what I would say is that you really can't lose hope in what court is and what it means and what it can do for people. I mean, Sojourner Truth went to court at a time when Black people in this country were not considered human in every part of it. And she won a court case that resulted in the emancipation of her son, who'd been wrongly enslaved. Biddy Mason, I'm a Los Angeles native, was a major landowner. She was a major landowner in the city, and she went to court and she won her emancipation after her enslaver brought her to California and then tried to get her back to Texas, and slavery was illegal in California. So court's been this incredible bastion of power for people who might not otherwise have it. And that is, and I also think it's something that really is a great leveler. So going back to your question, if my one bit of advice is to treat it with the respect it deserves. You know, it's a process. It's a process. And I don't think everybody respects it. I don't think that everybody respects the process. But you will be better served for a number of reasons if you do. And if you're adverse to somebody who's scandalous, there are ways of dealing with that. But to be sure, it's very hard.
Yeah. Well, Tanya, this has been a lot of fun having you on the show today, getting to know more about your book and know more about your show and also your work. How do people follow you? How do they connect?
Thanks, Adam. Well, you can find both my YouTube channel and my podcast on my website, TanyaAckerShow.com. And you can find the podcast, Tanya Acker Show. It's available on every podcast platform, iTunes, Spotify. Just go there. You'll find me. You can follow me on Instagram at Tanya Acker. And that's my handle everywhere. I try to keep it simple.
Fantastic. And for everybody listening, just so you know, we'll definitely put links in the show notes so you can just click on the link and head right on over. And speaking of the audience, if this is your first time with Mission Matters and you haven't done it yet, hit that subscribe or follow button. This is a daily show each and every day bringing you new content, new ideas, and hopefully new inspiration to help you along the way on your journey as well. So again, hit that subscribe or follow button. And Tanya, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks, Adam. This was great fun.